call it that, but still no closure yet, because now we have Joshua Komisarjevsky, who's going to be going on trial next year. One would imagine he would then have to show up, not have to, but he would certainly be showing up for this trial. So
and living it all over again.
We're almost halfway there, if you want to put it that way. Let's talk a little bit about Joshua Komisarjevsky. The prosecution really, or I should say the defense really painted him as the monster, and Stephen Hayes was just kind of going along with all of it. So what does Joshua Komisarjevsky have to look forward to when this trial happens?
He might try and play the same card. You know, no, it wasn't me. It was Stephen Hayes. I was the younger one. He was the one who took Jennifer Hawke-Petit to the bank and brought her back. He was the one who went out and bought the gasoline. Remember, it was Hayes who went out that night and got the gas and brought it back to the house. So,
and we also saw text messages, too, from Hayes to Komisarjevsky when Komisarjevsky was putting his child to bed.
Right.
And Hayes was said, I'm chomping at the bit
Let's
or something
get going.
like that.
Right. So we might expect the game of who's the bigger criminal to be played, just with the roles reversed when Josh Komisarjevsky goes to trial. That certainly will be a strong argument they'll make there. I mean, we know that both of these men have basically admitted to doing, the crime that day. The question is what's the penalty going to be? So the strategy of the defense will be to find a way to spare Josh Komisarjevsky the death penalty. Now, I don't know if the fact that Stephen Hayes has already been given the death penalty makes that more difficult. One might think it would, but we'll see how that plays out in the coming months. I think early 2011 is when we're going to see that trial coming up.
Right now, we are awaiting our reporters to come outside of the courtroom because no cameras are allowed inside. You can go to our website, too, ctnow.com. All of our reporters are having their live tweets, their live feeds from inside, letting us know the atmosphere inside the courtroom. So they'll be coming out soon. We'll be talking to them, and hopefully the Petit family, the Hawke family, will be holding a press conference, too, to give us their thoughts.
Yeah, another interesting thing, I think, is that he was convicted on 16 counts of the 17, but we're not going to get into those other counts. It's just these 6 because it was either death or life in prison, and there didn't seem to be a need to go through all of these lesser charges, so to speak. So this is it. It's death on all of these 6 counts, and the other 10 we're just not discussing.
That's correct. They go to the penalty phase with the 6 capital counts. We're hearing from inside the courtroom that the jury is still being polled. Helen Ubinis writes, one of the female jurors who was crying is being polled now. Again, a lot of emotion inside that courtroom. It sounds like it's very hushed but very emotional right now as they're going through the polling of the jury. A very slow process. They have to go through all the counts, and they want to go juror by juror just to make sure, again, like we talked about earlier, the state has set it up so that convicting a person to death is not a simple thing. It's a complicated act. It's a complicated process. You've got to weigh a lot of factors before you get to that point. And what we're seeing right now is sort of the end of that process. It'll be interesting. I'm not sure what the jurors, after the trial is over, may speak. I don't know if they're going to. It's really up to them at this point whether they want to or not. It will be certainly interesting to hear from them if they want to talk about what it's been like in that jury room over the last few days.
And it's interesting to note, we talked about this a little bit earlier, Andrew, that 9 men currently sit on Connecticut's death row. But as you said, the last person to die by the hands of the state was Michael Ross. He was a self-confessed serial killer. We've had a lot of people on the show talking about what's going to happen with the death penalty, and you said it could take years.
It could take a decade. It could take decades. I mean, the reality of it is very difficult to execute someone in Connecticut because even after you've been convicted and have received the death sentence, as Stephen Hayes has today, there are constitutional checks, there are appeals, there are processes that have to go through. It really wends its way through the legal system, and that takes years and years and years. Now, we know at one point Stephen Hayes had said, I want to die. He tried to kill himself. He indicated that he wanted a death sentence, and there was a lot of argument during the trial and during the penalty phases. Was that genuine, or was that just an effort to elicit sympathy from the jury? Was he just trying to play a card saying, yeah, I want to die, as if to show that he was remorseful for what he'd done? There was testimony on both sides of that issue. So we don't know what's going to happen next. Is he going to say, okay, you've given me a death sentence, now I want to die? I mean, that would open up a whole legal can of worms on its own, as it did when Michael Ross said he wanted to die.
It'll be death by lethal injection. I believe it's 3 different chemicals, all administered in the right amount at certain times to make it as least painful as possible. And that's what they do here in Connecticut.
That's correct.
Again, we received a statement from Governor Jody Rell. She just issued this. She says, quote, "The crimes that were committed on that brutal July night were so far out of the range of normal understanding that now, more than 3 years later, we still find it difficult to accept that they happened in one of our communities. I have long believed that there are certain crimes so heinous, so depraved, that society is best served by imposing the ultimate sanction on the criminal. Stephen Hayes stands convicted of such crimes, and today the jury has recommended that he should be subjected to the death penalty. I agree." And once again, she says, "I must commend Dr. Petit and his extended family for the way that they have conducted themselves throughout this horrific period." She says, "I would also like to thank the jurors who served throughout the case. They have seen and heard terrible things and faced extremely difficult choices. They have served with honor and deserve our appreciation." And going along with that, Andrew, you said this is the time when these jurors might start feeling just these emotions all over again, having to look at these pictures, having to go through this case, because that takes a toll on them as well.
Absolutely. As George said, as people learn the details of this case, we saw this in 2007 when the murders took place, that people were frightened. People all over the state were frightened. They locked their doors. They put alarm systems in. They bought dogs. They bought guns. People wanted to defend their homes. I mean, in many ways, and we've heard from psychologists who tried to parse why this particular case affected the way so many people saw the death penalty, that this is your worst fear. It's an intrusion right into the heart of your family. And Dr. Petit, tied up in the basement, unable to help his family in their suffering upstairs, really is a nightmare of proportions that have a profound effect on people. So in 2007, we saw that really get at people. Now that it's been brought up, we're seeing it really, really, really affect people again. So this case comes in waves and really reaches down and touches people in a very fundamental way. Now, these jurors, they've been living it. They've seen all the documents. They've seen all the evidence. They've seen all the pictures. We posted many of the pictures on our websites, but there were some we felt were not appropriate to put up. And they've seen it all. They've heard all the testimony. This is going to be imprinted on their minds.
Sure will. Let's send it back out to George Colley and just get his thoughts on this. George?
Yes, and following up on what Andrew just said, these jurors, they've been here. They haven't been. The judge has instructed them not to read the newspapers, not to watch the news. As they came to court every single day, they saw the media outside. They knew how important this case was. They knew how serious it was. Obviously, when they came back in the first part of this trial with 16 to 17 counts, they felt that Stephen Hayes was guilty, that he was guilty of all 16 of those counts, the only one being arson that he wasn't. But to get into where they are right now, when it comes down to them having to make a decision of life or death, I mean, that is a whole separate, that's a whole separate trial, and it's a whole other thing. I mean, you were hearing now from Helen inside about the jurors that are crying, about how they're holding hands, and how hearing over and over and over that death is appropriate in this case. For the jury to come to that, it is a long struggle. The state of Connecticut makes it very difficult for them to get to that point, and for them to get there, it tells you it's going to be, these jurors they didn't know each other when they came into this trial, but I think you're probably going to find that many of them will remain close beyond it, because they were a very tight-knit group. You heard at times through this penalty phase and then into this deliberations where you could hear clapping as if they had gotten over a hump, as if they had gotten unanimous on something, and we can now see why. Unanimous on all 6 of these capital felony counts. And when they had asked the questions and they come in, Judge Blue seemed to know how to handle them. He would be very, he knew the seriousness of it, but he would be very loose in how he spoke with them. There were moments, some very lighthearted moments for these jurors. But I think that you can imagine that this whole 7-week process for them has had to have caught up to them here at this point. And you're hearing about the people crying right now. We hope to hear from them a little bit later on. I want to toss it back to you.
Hey, George, Stephen Hayes' brother has been in court for the last few days. Have you seen him? How's he reacting to this?
Yeah, well, Matthew Hayes actually flew back home out west this morning. I spoke with him, and I saw him through the 3 days that he was here. He was a very friendly guy, very personable guy. He was somebody who would come. He was very nervous when he came into court, but by the day he left, something he said to me is that he had found some peace, that he was ready to go home. He's an unspoken of victim in this. I mean, obviously the Petit family are the ones that we know about. I think they're probably the people that we've been following this trial through their eyes, so to speak. But Matthew Hayes has also been a victim in this. He did not commit this crime, but he has had to live basically in hiding for the last three plus years. And so for him to show up here, come out of hiding, to show the support for his brother, a lot of people, including the members of the Hawke family and supporters of the Petits, had said, this is a pretty good guy to come and do that for his brother. It's still his blood. It's still his family. And despite how horrific this crime was, how horribly it affected his life, he still came to show that support. And I think a lot of people here thought a lot of that. Sarah?
All right. Thanks, George. We appreciate it.
We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back. We're still awaiting Lori Parrish. She's inside the courtroom. She's going to be coming out shortly, and we'll get her reaction. She can tell us exactly what happened inside court. So we're back right in just a moment.